The Grandview Country Club's private dining room sparkled with warm candlelight from crystal chandeliers, each facet casting dancing reflections across the mahogany walls lined with portraits of the club's most distinguished members. Mom had chosen the club's most exclusive space for her 55th birthday celebration, transforming the elegant room into something worthy of royalty with cascading white peonies and arrangements of rare orchids that probably cost more than most people's monthly salaries. I sat quietly at the far end of the polished dining table, positioned perfectly to observe both the intimate family gathering and the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a stunning view of the club's championship golf course. The setting sun painted the manicured landscape in shades of gold and amber, creating the kind of backdrop that made every conversation feel more important and every celebration more sophisticated. Mom held court at the head of the table, absolutely radiant in her emerald silk dress, her silver hair styled in an elegant chignon that showcased the diamond necklace Dad had given her for their anniversary. At 55, Dr. Margaret Carter still possessed the kind of presence that commanded respect in medical circles, and tonight, surrounded by her family and closest friends, she was glowing with the satisfaction that comes from a life well lived. 55 years, she said, raising her crystal glass of vintage champagne, and I can honestly say that each year has brought new reasons to be grateful. Richard and I have built something beautiful together. Our medical practices, our family, and this wonderful life we get to share. Dad beamed at her from the opposite end of the table, his distinguished gray beard neatly trimmed and his navy blazer perfectly complementing his successful physician's bearing. At 58, Dr. Richard Carter commanded respect as one of the region's most successful orthopedic surgeons, his practice handling complex cases that other doctors wouldn't attempt. My older brother Daniel dominated the conversation from his position at Mom's right hand, his voice carrying the confidence that comes from following perfectly in his parents' footsteps. At 30, he had just been named chief resident in cardiology at the city's most prestigious hospital, and his success was evident in everything from his Rolex Submariner to the way other young doctors sought his mentorship. The cardiovascular program is really taking off, Daniel was saying, adjusting his custom cufflinks with practiced casualness. We're seeing cases that would have been considered impossible just 5 years ago. Sometimes I look at what we're accomplishing and realize that medicine really is the perfect combination of science, art, and service to humanity. His wife Amanda nodded enthusiastically, elegant in her designer cocktail dress that spoke of the lifestyle that a successful doctor's salary could provide. It's so fulfilling to be part of something that genuinely makes a difference. Daniel's work is literally saving lives every day. I continued eating my perfectly prepared duck confit, letting their familiar conversation about medical excellence and professional achievement wash over me like sophisticated background music. They had no idea that the simple black dress I was wearing had been tailored by the same designer who dressed Fortune 500 CEOs, or that the understated silver bracelet on my wrist was worth more than Daniel's annual resident salary. Speaking of making a difference and building meaningful careers, Mom's voice took on the tone she used when she wanted to impart wisdom earned through decades of experience. I think this birthday celebration is the perfect time to discuss family expectations and what it means to carry the Carter family legacy forward. The conversation around the table quieted as Mom's authoritative voice commanded attention from the intimate gathering of family and close friends. Her words carried the weight of someone who had spent 30 years building a successful medical practice and who expected her children to honor that tradition of excellence. When Richard and I started our practices 30 years ago, Mom continued, her tone taking on the practiced cadence of someone accustomed to addressing medical conferences and hospital boards, we made a commitment not just to healing people, but to building something that our children could be proud of, something that would establish the Carter name as synonymous with medical excellence. Dad nodded approvingly, his pride in their shared achievements evident in his expression. Their success was legendary in medical circles. Two physicians who had built complementary practices that served thousands of patients while maintaining the kind of reputation that other doctors aspired to achieve. Looking at Daniel, Mom went on, her voice carrying clearly across the elegant dining room, I see that legacy being honored and expanded. He's not just following our path, he's innovating, pushing boundaries and preparing to take cardiac surgery to new heights that we never imagined. Daniel straightened in his chair, clearly basking in the public acknowledgement of his achievements. Amanda squeezed his hand, her expression radiating the satisfaction that comes from being married to the family's acknowledged success story. Then Mom's gaze found me, and I felt the familiar weight of her disappointment settling over the celebration like an expensive but suffocating blanket. "And then there's Olivia," she said, her tone shifting subtly but unmistakably, the warmth draining from her voice like champagne from a broken glass. "My youngest daughter, who at 27 continues to worry me with her complete refusal to pursue any meaningful career path." The words hung in the elegant air like the scent of the expensive orchids, beautiful but overwhelming, impossible to ignore. I could feel the attention of the entire table focusing on me with the intensity of surgical lights, probably wondering why this celebration of medical achievement was taking such a pointed turn toward family disappointment. "Olivia graduated with honors from Johns Hopkins," Mom continued, her voice carrying the frustration that comes from watching potential go unfulfilled, "but she refuses to apply to medical school, law school, or any graduate program that would put her intelligence to meaningful use." Dad leaned forward, assuming his role as the family's practical advisor. "We've offered her every opportunity: research positions at the hospital, connections with the best medical schools in the country, even funding for any legitimate professional program she wanted to pursue. Instead," Daniel chimed in, his voice carrying the condescending tone that successful older siblings perfect over years of being the golden child, "she insists on working on what she calls business projects that no one in this room would consider serious ventures." Amanda nodded sympathetically, though I caught the hint of satisfaction in her expression. It's so hard when family members refuse to take advantage of the opportunities they've been given. Some people just don't have the drive for real achievement. I could feel the attention of nearby tables in the dining room, other club members probably wondering why our family celebration was becoming increasingly public and uncomfortable. Daniel stood up slightly, apparently deciding that this was the perfect moment to drive his point home with theatrical flair. "Actually, since we're talking about honest family conversations, I think everyone here needs to understand something about Olivia's situation." Here we go, I thought, recognizing the tone he used when he wanted to make a dramatic point that would be remembered long after the evening ended. "She's completely broke," Daniel announced, his voice carrying across the dining room with the authority that comes from never having been truly challenged. "Living in that tiny studio apartment downtown, driving a car that should have been scrapped years ago, working on these fantasy business projects that generate absolutely no income." The words cut through the sophisticated atmosphere like a scalpel through skin, sharp and designed to cause maximum impact. I could see the shock and sympathy on the faces of Mom's friends, the way they looked at me with the kind of pity usually reserved for charity cases. "We've been supporting her financially for months," Daniel continued, apparently encouraged by the dramatic effect his words were having. "Paying her rent, covering her groceries, essentially subsidizing her refusal to grow up and take responsibility for her life." Mom dabbed her eyes with her cloth napkin, playing the role of the concerned mother perfectly. "We keep hoping she'll realize that these business fantasies aren't going to support her and that she needs to pursue a real career, but she refuses to listen to reason." Dad nodded gravely, his expression mixing parental authority with what he probably thought was compassionate concern. "At some point, tough love becomes necessary. We can't enable this behavior forever." That's when the dining room's maitre d' approached our table, his expression respectful but slightly uncertain. "Excuse me, Dr. Carter," he said, addressing Mom with the deference that club staff always showed to prominent members. "There's a gentleman here to see Ms. Olivia Carter. He says he's from Goldman Sachs and that she's expecting him." The table fell silent except for the soft classical music playing from hidden speakers and the distant sound of other diners' conversations. Everyone stared at the maitre d', as if he had just announced that aliens had landed on the golf course. "I'm sorry," Mom said, her voice carrying a note of confusion. "Did you say Goldman Sachs?" Before the maitre d' could respond, a distinguished man in an impeccably tailored suit approached our table. He was tall, silver-haired, and carried himself with the kind of confidence that comes from managing billion-dollar transactions. I recognized him immediately. Jonathan Mitchell, senior partner at Goldman Sachs and one of the most respected investment bankers on the East Coast. "Ms. Carter," Jonathan said, walking directly to me with a warm smile, "I apologize for interrupting your family celebration, but I wanted to personally deliver the news about the GeneTech merger." The room went dead silent. Every conversation at nearby tables stopped as distinguished club members recognized one of the most powerful investment bankers in the country standing at our family table. "Jonathan," I replied, standing to shake his hand, "thank you for coming personally. I wasn't expecting you until tomorrow." "The deal was too significant to handle over the phone," he said, reaching into his briefcase and pulling out an elegant leather portfolio. "Ms. Carter, the $2.3 billion merger between BioLuna Pharmaceuticals and GeneTech Industries has been approved by both boards of directors and cleared by regulatory authorities." The silence that followed was so complete that I could hear the soft whisper of expensive fabric as people shifted in their seats, the barely audible sound of crystal glasses being set down on tables, the distant hum of the club's air conditioning system. $2.3 billion? Mom whispered, her voice barely audible. Jonathan opened the portfolio and placed several documents on the table where everyone could see them. "Ms. Carter, as the majority shareholder of BioLuna Pharmaceuticals, you'll receive $1.8 billion in cash, plus equity stakes in the merged company that our analysts value at approximately $900 million. Dad's champagne glass slipped from his hand, shattering against his plate with a sound like gunshots in the sudden quiet. Daniel's mouth fell open mid-chew. Amanda's eyes were fixed on the documents as if they might disappear if she looked away. "BioLuna Pharmaceuticals," Jonathan continued, apparently oblivious to the shock radiating from my family members, "which you founded 5 years ago with initial capital of $2 million, is now being recognized as one of the most innovative biotech companies in the world. The cancer treatment protocols you've developed are literally revolutionizing oncology." I smiled at my family's stunned expressions. The fantasy business projects Daniel mentioned are actually pharmaceutical research. I've been developing targeted cancer therapies that have just completed phase 3 clinical trials with unprecedented success rates. Jonathan nodded enthusiastically. 93% remission rates in stage 4 pancreatic cancer patients. It's the kind of breakthrough that happens maybe once in a generation. Daniel was staring at the documents, his medical training allowing him to understand the significance of what he was seeing. 93% remission in pancreatic cancer? That's impossible. The current survival rates are less than 5%. Not impossible, I corrected gently. Just difficult. I've been working with a team of biochemists and oncologists to develop targeted therapies that attack cancer stem cells while leaving healthy tissue completely untouched. Jonathan pulled out another document. The FDA fast-tracked approval for 3 of BioLuna's cancer treatments, and the European Medicines Agency followed suit last month. We're projecting annual revenues of over $4 billion within 2 years. Mom found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "You developed cancer treatments?" "I founded BioLuna Pharmaceuticals with the money from Grandpa Carter's inheritance," I explained. "Instead of using it for medical school, I invested it in research equipment and hired some of the brightest minds in biochemistry. We've been working 16-hour days for 5 years to develop treatments that could save millions of lives." Amanda was studying the merger documents with obvious fascination. "The valuation sheet shows assets worth over $3 billion. Conservative estimate," Jonathan confirmed. "When you factor in the intellectual property portfolio and the pipeline of treatments still in development, BioLuna's total value approaches $5 billion. Dad finally managed to close his mouth, though his eyes remained wide with disbelief. "Olivia, you own a pharmaceutical company worth $5 billion? "I built it," I corrected. "While you were all assuming I was wasting my time and my education, I was assembling a team of researchers who shared my vision of making cancer a manageable disease rather than a death sentence." Jonathan glanced around the table, clearly sensing the family dynamics but maintaining his professional demeanor. "Ms. Carter, the merger documents require your signature by midnight tonight. Should we proceed?" I looked at my family's shocked faces, then back at Jonathan. "Actually, let's handle this properly. Mom, Dad, Daniel, I'd like you to witness the signing. After all, this is a celebration." As Jonathan laid out the signature pages, conversations throughout the dining room had resumed, but with a decidedly different energy. Other club members were glancing over with obvious curiosity, probably wondering why Goldman Sachs was conducting billion-dollar business at a birthday dinner. "One more thing," Jonathan said as I signed the final document. Harvard Business School wants to offer you a position as visiting professor to teach a course on biotech entrepreneurship. Apparently, building a $5 billion company in 5 years is the kind of case study they want their students to learn from. Daniel leaned forward, his earlier condescension completely gone. Olivia, I have to ask, would you consider collaborating with our hospital? Because what you've developed could transform our entire oncology department. Of course, I said, pulling out my business card. Though you should know that licensing our treatments requires significant investment in specialized equipment and training protocols. Mom reached across the table and took my hand, her eyes bright with tears. Sweetheart, I'm so sorry. We had no idea what you were building. I know you didn't, I replied, squeezing her hand. And I forgive you. But I hope you'll remember this the next time you're tempted to judge someone's potential based on appearances. Jonathan packed up his briefcase and prepared to leave. Ms. Carter, congratulations on building one of the most successful biotech companies in history. The industry is calling this the most significant advancement in cancer treatment since chemotherapy was developed. As he walked away, the silence at our table was finally broken by Dad's voice. $5 billion. And you're saving cancer patients. That was always the goal, I said. The money is nice, but the real success is knowing that our treatments will help millions of people who would otherwise have no hope. Daniel stood up and walked around the table to embrace me. I was wrong about you. Completely wrong. You didn't waste your education, you used it better than any of us imagined. I learned from the best, I replied, hugging him back. You taught me that medicine is about healing people. I just found a different way to do it. As the evening continued and other club members began approaching our table to congratulate me and ask about investment opportunities, Mom stood up to address the dining room. Ladies and gentlemen, she announced, her voice carrying clearly across the elegant space, I want to share some wonderful news. My daughter Olivia has just completed a merger that will bring life-saving cancer treatments to patients worldwide. The applause that followed was genuine and enthusiastic, and as I stood to acknowledge it, I realized that sometimes the sweetest victory isn't proving people wrong about your limitations. Sometimes it's showing them that love and support can transform any family, especially when the work you're doing can transform the world. The next morning, 5 major medical centers called to discuss licensing BioLuna's cancer treatments. Mom and Dad helped me prioritize the calls based on which hospitals could help the most patients fastest.